focus will determine how they operate. So how we'll do this is we'll go with whichever panelists would want to answer first, and then we'll just let it roll like that.
Well, when I think of it, I'll start off because I like to talk, and then I'll try to mute and not talk anymore. But I reference to Acts chapter 2 and how the Lord added to the church daily those being saved. There was a crisis situation during the time of the disciples, the early church, and you find that not only did they add to the church daily, you find that they had a community to remember what happened with Jesus and to reflect on his promises and look forward to his soon return. So to some degree, it's a both and. But within the church itself, it doesn't necessarily refer to unsaved. It refers to people who need hope and wholeness.
Can everyone hear me? It's okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I think just to even piggyback when I read that question, I was trying to think of the answer, and I think Brian hit it. I think for both of those options, I think the church can be a means of both, if that's how you define those actions. But I think we can also get in danger by making it seem like that is the ending point of the church, right? Like that's the only purpose of the church. That's it. It's only supposed to bring unsaved people. It's only supposed to develop that. That's where it gets dangerous when we try and box the church in a definition like that. But I believe the only guidelines that we get from the text, especially Acts, and that's what I was going to refer to too as well. Our biggest guideline for the church and the role of the church is connecting people and focus on Jesus. And like those are the keys. And I think in doing that, we will do both those things. And we'll see the role of the church in both those areas, and we'll continue to just grow the church. But I think if we try and define it in just one of those, or either or, it can get very crisis or like create conflict very easily, because some people just want to bring in unsaved, again in quotation marks, and some people just want to develop our people. And I think if we just focus on Jesus and people, we can really see what we're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. I think that's awesome. I just want to say, when I first read this question, first of all, props to all of you guys. I was like, my husband and I were like so inspired, so encouraged that you guys are doing this. So thank you. And when I first read the question, really the one word that came to my mind was blood. If your blood runs red, that's what this is about, which is like, I know.
Turn your mute off.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I've just been going on. Okay, so I just want to say, I want to thank you guys for doing this. My husband and I were so encouraged by how you guys have taken the initiative to do this. And I want to say that when I read this question, the one word came to mind. It was blood. That's it. If your blood runs red, that's what this is about. And as a church, like, organization-wise, I really felt like going back to, like, I need to read this question and keep it in mind. So is the church primarily supposed to develop Christians, or is it to bring unsaved people? I love that you put those in there. And depending on a church's focus will determine how they operate. I think when it comes down to it, it's when you see a person, do you want them to have the hope? Do you want them to know what you know in terms of like your best friend? Do you want them to not be afraid, especially in this time? To answer that question, I feel like the church's role, and piggybacking off what both of you guys said, if your blood runs red, you need to know this. We have that hope. Yeah, that's what I have to say to that.
I love that we're all kind of pretty much on the same page, because when I read that, I also thought, I'm like, why does it have to be either or? Like, I think we've seen it happen in the past already. What happens when you focus on one versus the other, you know? And I think it's really pretty much piggybacking off of what Atishain said as well. It's about blood. How do I say this? Not one side needs God more than the other. We both need him equally, you know? So it's like, who's to say, okay, you already got him, you're good, you're done, as Ben was saying. It's not like you're done once you hit that point, once you become baptized. And I think that's kind of one of the mistakes that I've seen in the past, is that we're like, okay, you're already here, you're good, like we don't need to invest in you anymore. And then they end up dying out and they end up leaving, and it's like, it's this whole cycle. And I think it's so amazing how God made it work. There's a verse in the Bible somewhere, sorry, I don't exactly remember where it is, but basically it was saying that as you water other people, you're watering yourself. And so I feel like God set it up in that way, so that it's not once you reach this place, you're done. It's like, now that you've reached this place, now you pour into other people. And it's a cycle that as you pour into other people, you're pouring into yourself. And I think that's what changes the way that people do church, is when they realize that it's not that they've reached the finish line. It's now that you've learned, now it's your turn to go and teach.
That is awesome. Thank you guys. I love how you guys are all so connected. Like, for real. I know you guys did not discuss this before, did you? So I love how you guys are so connected. I hope that helped. We're gonna go to our second question, which was how can we be healthy and open-minded Christians?
I grew up in a home where one parent was not a believer, and my whole family wasn't. And I think that's where the whole your blood runs red thing is, that people are just all the same, you know, in the church, out of the church. And, you know, sorry, I always have to reference back to the question itself. So being healthy, open-minded Christian to me is like, find someone that you love, like, or not just find someone that you love, but identify the people that you love, and just continue to look at them the way God would look at them. Like, how does God see these people, whether we per se like them or not? Becoming aware of how God sees them and it's constant. It's like on a daily basis, minute to minute basis. He doesn't have the same biases as we do, or he doesn't have biases. So it's seeing through God's lens.
I think
That's awesome.
I think that this also kind of ties into the first question, because it's in the way that we all equally need God. I think when you're constantly reminded of that you need God, then you're brought into a place of humility where you're like, who are you to judge somebody else based on their sins, you know? And it's so easy when you can't put a face to the sin to be like, oh, that's wrong, or this person, blah, 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 blah. But as Atishain said, when you're able to put a face, or like realize that these sins are not just floating around for you to like be pointing out to people and like condemning them and stuff like that, and you remember that these are people too, then it's a lot harder to be condemning of them. And that's one of the things that I also love the most about God. In John 3, John 3:16, very important, but also John 3:17, it says that God did not come to condemn the world, he came to save them. And I think we need to remember that too, that we are not in a place to condemn people. God's love is redeeming love. You know, his love is restorative love. And having that in mind, knowing that God did that for you, you're supposed to now be filled of that and have that outpouring from your heart and your life.
Yeah. I'll go next. I think how do we be open-minded and healthy Christians, we have to kind of ask ourselves, like, when am I being closed-minded? And I think one of the biggest keys of being closed-minded is when we think that we don't have anything else to learn. When we think that there's nothing else that I can be taught, and that's dangerous. That's super dangerous because as humans, we have to realize our concept of us, how limited we are. You know, when we think that, and sometimes I think we get prideful in our Christianity, we get prideful in our narrative that we think that that's it. And when we do that, we're limiting God. When we do that, we're limiting God growing us. We limit how God wants to work in us. And I think the way to be open-minded and healthy, open-minded Christians is to understand that God is ambiguous. And he lets us understand little things about him. And that's the beauty of it, right? That's his relationship. He lets us know a little bit more about him. But we can never fully understand everything. And I think when we can understand and accept that, that helps us grow because, man, like it just like when I really think about how I grew up, especially how I was taught as growing up as a Christian with my mom, who's really conservative. And she did that because that was her story and that was her narrative. But like, you see how God is so intentional, but he's bigger than what I see how he's been intentional to me. Right? Like God is intentional with each and every one of us. And the way he reveals himself to us is intentional to our narrative. And that's the beauty of it, right? God's like his narrative to Brian, to Lavina, to Shine, like that's like God showing himself to us. But like the beauty about God, and like this is the craziness about him, is we can think we know him in our narrative, but he's bigger than that too. And like that's amazing. And I think when we can accept that and when we can really understand, like, man, like it's not just me, like, man, I've learned these things about God, but maybe someone else is learning something else too. Right? I can't know everything about God. And when you can accept that, it'll free you and it can it'll open your mind because you know you have more to learn as a person, as a Christian.
For a couple of years, we had the Kulsa camp at our summer camp, the Sikhs. And one of the things I've appreciated about my Sikh friends or Sikh friends is that they are constantly wanting to gain understanding, constantly wanting to learn, are very open-minded in asking questions of inquiry. There was a time that we came down off of Third Ledge, and it was after sundown. We had prayer up on the top of the ledge, both in Punjabi and for us as English speaking as Adventists. And when I got down to the Pathfinder Bowl, there were three guys, young adults, and they were inquiring, tell me about Sabbath. Here you are starting a fire, and yet it doesn't seem like it's Sabbath is over because it's midnight. And so I had the chance to share that it's with sundown. And to make the long story short, they sat back and go, we have learned something new. This has been a good Sabbath. Not that I was promoting Sabbath per se. I mean, yes, but it was trying to give that conversation that we had with wanting to gain understanding from each other. I've learned a lot from my Sikh friends. And one of the things I think about is understanding. In Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't trust in your own understanding, but in every way acknowledge God and acknowledge Jesus Christ. And what I gather from that is that it presupposes you're gaining understanding. You're gaining learning. But that's not where you lean into. You lean into God. You lean into God where you don't know very well, as the writer of Corinthians says, we don't see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist. But it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then, see it all as clearly as God sees us, knowing him directly just as he knows us. But for right now, until that completeness, we have three things to do. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly, and the best of the three is to love.
That's really awesome. Thank you, guys. I really like what all of you guys said. All of you guys were definitely on point. And I totally agree, especially Ben, saying don't get caught up in thinking that you know you know everything, because then you get to a point where you're not taking in any information, you're not learning, you can't grow yourself that way. Especially what Pastor Brian Wall said, just not trusting in your own understanding, but trusting in God's understanding, which was key, really key. So awesome. Thank you, guys. We're going to go for the next question.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Does anybody else get to respond, or is this listening?
Yeah.
Because I'd love to hear some input from others.
Yes. So what we're doing, Maris texted in the chat, and I believe she said that everyone just write down your questions, and shoot it in the chat. And so afterward, we can continue to discuss that.
Perfect.
But yeah, good question. Next question. What are we supposed to do when things get harder than now?
The first thing that you have to think about is that you're going to get the adrenaline rush, and what's important is to be calm. If anybody saw Charles Aguilar's video from Uganda, he talked about how fear starts creating things that we start doing things we normally would not do. And so to be calm, I think, is the first thing. And for me, Micah 6:8 really helps me with that. He's shown you, person, what is good, what does the Lord require, but to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly before God.
I'm going to share something. We've been doing Zoom prophecy classes for the last, whenever this isolation thing started. And I had done 3 classes and I couldn't get it. We were doing Daniel Revelation. I was actually like in tears. I was frustrated. I had a headache. And I was trying really hard to understand. I reached out to a friend, or he was like, you want me to tutor you? I was like, yes, please, because I'm feeling really dumb right now. And he opened it to I think Daniel 8, where it talks about how Daniel he fainted because with so much information, or he was just overwhelmed. And I was so happy because I felt like, okay, if he, like a giant of faith, can pass out because of this information that I'm trying to learn, then I'm good. Or like, God's going to help me through it. And it's like, to answer that, a few things is, one, we're not in the fiery furnace right now. We're not being thrown into the lion's den. We are not being shot at by Pharaoh's army and facing the sea to be opened up. And so I think learning those stories and really believing and imagining yourself in these situations, I really think God put them there for us to be like, okay, when I am facing a lion, I will know the God who is with me in the fire, in the pit, facing the water, just so in the belly of a whale, like just stuff like that. And so that's one thing. And I just love that, he is present, he is true, holding on to the promises. And I tell my kids too, my husband works in the ICU at VGH. And every day I'm like, 5 kids alone, what if? And then this happens. It's just like, some days I do feel like it's so bad. I'm like, God help me, what am I going to do? But then, yeah, looking at Charles Aguilar's videos, those are, I have a great life. This is good. I'm not going to complain, So holding on and studying now. And I want to say, studying prophecy, for example, I've never really been into it. And the question was, why is it important to study, And I was like, well, it's not important unless it actually gets you to reach out more, or it draws you closer to God. But someone said, God put it in his word. So maybe it is important because this is his word, and maybe it's important to understand. And so going through, I'm almost done, but going through the 7 churches, I was able to look at who Jesus, not just who Jesus is, but who he's offering for himself to be in my life. And I think it's like really just holding on to, again, the only thing we have to fear for the future is if we forget how the Lord has led us in the past. So it's really holding on to like all the times that God has answered in our times of crisis.
I think one of the things that makes this situation particularly hard, whether it's hard of understanding or it's like hard to go through or just, I don't know, all the different ways things can be hard. I think what makes it hard is when you think you're doing it alone, or when you think that it's on you to find the solution, that it's on you to have to figure it out. And I think one of the things that helps us when things get harder, especially if things get harder from now, is remembering that you don't have to do it alone. Like God said that he's the Lord over all, not just over the spiritual things that you're going through, not just over the financial things that you're going through, but like every single aspect of your life. And again, really getting down to the basis of what God's character is. God says that he is love. And to understand that, and to also understand that his love, again, as I mentioned before, that his love is renewing. It's supposed to help, it's a restorative love. And also understanding that his ways are not your ways, his thoughts are not your thoughts. And then now understanding his character, and now knowing that, and now looking at your situation through those lenses, that, you know, it's like, what is God teaching me here? How is God healing me through this? And realizing that I'm not the one that needs to come up with with the solution, because I can't. Like, what do I have? Like, what wisdom do I have to impart on this situation? I have nothing. I'm only human, you know? It's like, the only thing I can do is empty myself, to humble myself, so then I can be filled with God's wisdom and provision, because God already knows the end. Like, God has already won, you know, whether you think it's like such a trivial thing that you're going through, or if it's like this huge mountain that you can't even see past. Like, God said that he's with you as you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. He said that he'll take you through it. He didn't say he'll drop you off in the middle of it and good luck trying to figure it out. You know, you took Pathfinders, you should know by now, kind of thing. But no, God's like, I'm with you. I'll walk with you, you know? And so I think that's kind of like, whenever I'm hit with a hard situation, you know, as mentioned before, like, you hear stories of people in the past. And if God was faithful and loving with them then and took them through it then, who's to say he's not going to do that for you now? He said that he's the same today, yesterday, tomorrow, forever, you know? And so when things get hard and when things get harder, like, really stand on the promises of God's character when he says that he is love, and know that he's not just going to leave you there. And I think once you kind of realize that it's not all on you, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it just makes everything so much easier, you know? Because then every battle is like smaller now, because then it's like, okay, I just need to do this, then I can get to this next step, and then that next step, and stuff like that. And yeah.
No, I agree, Lavina, and everything everyone else said, it was just very along the lines of what I'm going to say here. But another thing that I want to add is I've been reading with Fraser Valley Business Academy. We've been reading the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leadership, and one of the habits, I think it's the second or the third, and it's really interesting. And I've been trying to see how Jesus even shows us this. Is one of the things I think in our pride of humanity and in like our struggle is that we like to control things, right? And we like to take ownership and have a grip on everything in the world, like everything that's in our life. We want to be able to control it so we can know the outcome and what's going on. And so when something like COVID happens, it shakes us up because control is gone, right? Like, I can't control what's going on in outside my house. I can't determine what's going to happen by these actions, etc. We're out of control. That's why it's chaotic. And I've learned, I think, and this is the example I've learned from Jesus, is it's like when things get hard and when things are going to get harder, we have to look at what do we have control of and really focus on those things. I think those are like baby steps for us to find ease, because I think God understands that, like, that we want to control things, and God understands that we want to be able to have influence over our lives. And I think God still allows us in chaos to have influence over things. It's those, and even though those things change, we still need to be able to look for, like, what do I still have control of? Like, I still can control what I'm going to do for my health in this next 24 hours. I can still control what I'm going to do in my devotional life for the next 24 hours. And though we can't control right now, like finding a cure for COVID in our homes right now in BC, though we can't control maybe pushing us gathering or like making sure everyone has masks or any, like, there's things that we can't control and that causes us fear in these times. But I think God asks us, like, what can you control? What do you have influence over now in these hard times? And when you can lean on those and then lean on those through him, not just like trust those things, but trust God to help you focus on those things, it can bring a lot of ease. It can bring a lot of rest and bring a lot of peace of mind, because even amongst chaos, we serve a God who still lets us have influence over things. And so that's what I think is the best thing to do when things are getting hard and things are going to get harder.
Right. Yeah, I debated whether or not to share something that happened back in my day when I was a young adult, or share something currently. Back in my day, when I was going to college, I had a teacher tell me that I shouldn't go to school. I should drop out and go into the vocational profession rather than be in academics. But that's just one of the many stories of hardships that just really grabbed me. And it was the church that helped me. It was the fellowship of the community of young adults. Today, my wife is being trained and is now set up to work with the COVID positive patients in Abbotsford. She hadn't worked in ICU for some time. I think I heard you, Sean, you're involved with ICU. Well, okay.
Lawrence.
Lauren is. Yeah, that's a pretty intense time to be right now. And of course, we were going to sell our home in Abbotsford during this time, and we thought we would do pretty good. Things seemed to be going very well until COVID hit. And so now we're in a state of crisis. We're in a crisis of a huge mortgage of 2 homes. I'm in a crisis of summer camp. I believe in young adults. I'm advocating for them. I know others advocate in different ways, and it's really hard, because I take to the Lord the 30-some staff that I have that count on summer employment to be able to go to school. And so I say these things because in incremental times throughout my life, I have learned to trust in the Lord with the hard times. And it may not seem that hard right now because I'm full of joy and gladness, but that's been my MO for a very long time. But it doesn't make it that it's not difficult. It's a challenge. In James 1, chapter 1, verse 3 says, "Count it pure joy when you endure trial." And so Pam and I are claiming that, and it's a trial sometimes. So you never know when your next step is going to be harder than the previous step that you were involved with. That's all I have to say, and just work with the Lord on it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And so my quick takeaway is I love what Miss Shine said here. I hope I got this right. The only thing we have to fear in the future is forgetting what the Lord has done for us in the past. And that was really key for me.
That's Ellen White.
Sorry?
That's Ellen G. White.
That was definitely key for me. Just realizing that it's not about what's happening in the future, or what's to come, or the trials that we're going to face, but just realizing what God has gotten us through in the past and pushing forward through that. And then what Lavina said, we don't need to think we're going through rough times by ourselves, which was key for me. Definitely just relying on God, and all you guys kind of talked on this subject, just leaning on God during tough times, which is huge. And what Ben said, just not focusing on what we can't control, because a lot of times we do, but just focusing on things that we can control and relying on God once again, and then Pastor Brian also that key for me, Pastor Brian is always joyful, but just realizing that we all have a choice to be either mad at times or joyful at times, and seeing Pastor Brian is chooses to be joyful during trials and tribulations, which is huge. So let's go on to the next question. And I also wanted to thank Miss Mariana's family and Pastor Brian's family for just helping through the COVID situation and everything. So thank you guys. Number 4, how do I prepare myself for uncertainties in the future?
What I did as soon as COVID happened, back when I was in Montana at the end of February and then the beginning of March, I looked up the Adventist Review. I wanted to know how the Adventist Church was coping with the Spanish flu and the end of World War I. I didn't know it, but those two coincided identical together. And the reason why it's called the Spanish flu, of course, is because the rest of the European countries censored all news broadcasts. Only Spain could broadcast what was happening. So it was called the Spanish flu because they're the ones that reported it as happening throughout Europe. But what really has grabbed me is reading the review back then. Most of the conversation in the review is about mission work. Some of the launching of our greatest mission projects were happening in 1919 to 1924. British Columbia got established during that time. And it was interesting. It was talking about somebody who'd come to the lower part of British Columbia to start a work, and then they died from Spanish flu. And it's like, that's the end. Excited about coming, and then they died. But others came and continued, and we're the result of that kind of establishment, those of us who are in BC. And I think that's a powerful thing. Like Shine said, let's not forget how God has led in the past. I recently looked at a history book on the church in Canada, and it's just amazing how the young adults were so forward thinking of accomplishing the mission and message of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's an inspiring read. And so that's one of the things that I think of. How to prepare for uncertainties in the future is you just go follow Jesus. And that's not easy to say because I don't know how I would be in that kind of crisis situation, but it is about following Jesus.
I want to say that I think what's key is our perspective. Like we say the word uncertain is interesting because then what is certain? Like we were biking. Oh my God, sounds like we bike a lot. But yes, we do bike a lot because we're allowed to do that. So we're biking and 5 kids, Lawrence and I, were a block from our house. And this guy comes up with a knife and comes up and is trying to I don't know, he's mumbling something. Fast forward, I run with the kids home, lock him in there with Dad. Lawrence, the guy's coming at Lawrence still. I go into my car, separate the two. We call the cops. He goes down. It is crazy. Were we fairly certain we'd have an uneventful bike ride trying to get the kid? Yeah, we thought if we do it all the time, right? But it changes in my mind now. We have to be ready, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is even if we didn't think we were comfortable before COVID, we could do everything, anything. But guys, it says all in here what to expect, like a thief in the night. We have been asleep, and we know this, right? Laodicea and all that. But I go back to the question, and I want to challenge that thought. The question is, how do I prepare myself for the uncertainties in the future? Well, we expect them. I mean, we be happy that we're okay, we're awake, as opposed to not being alert and ready. And here's the thing, going back to the biking story, Lawrence was going to go with our eldest for a sprint, and I was going to take the smaller 4. And the guy was still coming up to me. I think he wasn't all there. And I think I reminded him of somebody, and he was coming at me. So Lawrence saw that and came back. And he almost didn't, right? He was like, oh, she can handle herself. So all this to say, like, it's our we got to watch our perspective, and we got to watch, what are we certain of? I mean, if you really write it down, what are we certain of? And it is, and again, going back to studying prophecy, like, where I was in tears, not understanding, like, the whole 2300 and all that, I'm still learning, but it's beautiful how God prepares us. And he didn't say I'm giving you prophecy to scare you. He says, I'm giving you prophecy so you'll know that I love you, I'm real, and what I say I'm gonna do, and I'm legit. So that's my answer to that question.
My question would be to everybody is, from where do you pivot? Basketball can be an uncertainty as to who's going to win, but how do you pivot? And I think all of us have to figure out what that point is. And of course, for us as Seventh-day Adventists, it's that relationship with God and pivoting from that relationship and moving forward.
Yeah, I think uncertainty brings a lot of pain and suffering. Certainty can bring a lot of like, there's the biggest like thing I can think of is suffering in that, big or small, and it's defined in our own way. But I almost think that, like, uncertainty, or like the effect of uncertainty, is guaranteed for us to happen into our lives, like, once or in one way or another. But like you just said, Brian, like, what Shine's saying is just like, we need to know what we're leaning onto, so that when that happens, we can bounce back, or that we can move forward. Because if we don't have that, like, relationship with Jesus, if we're not connected with Jesus, when that comes, the pain might last a little bit longer. I think it will last longer. The pain will be hard to get back up. But what we're guaranteed with Jesus is that God doesn't tell us, like, oh man, with me, things will just be will be certain. It doesn't mean that with me, everything will just be easy, or you won't have any more surprises in your life. But God's saying, with me, like, I guarantee you, I'll get you back up. With me, I guarantee you, like, the pain will be only for a little bit. I guarantee you, like, I'll bring you healing from that pain. I think that's the important part, because to prepare for uncertainty is almost impossible, I think, in that sense. But it's about, God shows us how to prepare for recovering from uncertainty.
That's so good. Recovering from uncertainty.
Yeah. And also, nothing is certain. So, like, basically the question is, how do you prepare for everything? Because like, even the things that you think are certain, like, I thought that, I would be in school right now, but the way COVID was set up, I'm not there. So it's like, those are things that you can't plan for. But I think the way that you plan for certainty is something that I've been learning a lot now in this time, is that you're kind of forced to reflect and think about, like, what do you need for certain, I guess, like, what are the essentials, and I think if you continue to build on that, then no matter what uncertainties come your way, you'll always have what you like, the essentials that you need, and yeah. And even if you were to know the uncertainties that were gonna come your way, or like the hardships that were gonna come your way, what do you do with that information, And I remember we went to one of those seminar things, and the pastor was talking about how when people read prophecy, or when they learn about end times, they usually just, like, freak out, and they're just in this state of panic and the state of fear. And it's like, okay, well, now that you know what's coming, what are you going to do about it, And I think that's what we need to focus on, is, like, focus on the things that are coming, like the hardships that are coming, like Joseph, like, God gave him the dreams, and, like, God told him famine's gonna come. And so what did he do? He didn't just like sit there going like, oh no, there's a famine, blah blah blah. I guess I'm just gonna go when that comes. But he started planning. He started preparing for that. And like, we have the gift that God has given us through his word that tells us of the things that are coming. And there's not that there's no point in worrying about the things that are uncertain, but there's so many things that are uncertain that, like, if you keep worrying about those things, you just end up running in circles, end up wasting your time. So like, focus on the things that are essential, that like you actually need, which is like ground yourself in God, like, and basically everything that God has taught us how to do was meant to help sustain us as well. So I don't know if that answers anything, but
Do you guys ever hear the energy to worry is the same energy that you could use to plan? Which I'm just putting it out there. Like, I tend to be negative and complain too. But I want to address these really great questions. What about uncertainty scares you the most? And what's your source of security? And, just being real, where it says, I hope it's okay, Braden, if it's okay to go here. What about uncertainty scares you the most? And the source of your security, being prepared perhaps, as a mom, like I literally have like 5 outfits per kid in the car with because you never know if you're going to have an exploding diaper and stuff. And you want to minimize the suffering, or you want to minimize surprise, and you want to, for them as well, like you want to, comfort them as well. But I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to hit on these questions.
Yeah, you guys have touched on these, and we had some questions come in just on that. Ms. Marianne, you just answered, what about uncertainty scares you? Which is one question that we did get just now from someone that commented. So if any of you guys want to elaborate on what about uncertainty scares you the most?
I would love a different question, because I live in a world of uncertainty. Nothing seems to be certain in my life, though every day I wake up and something's happening. But I have to trust in the Lord just about everything, from the time I get up in the day to the time I go to bed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really do like what Ben said. Preparing for uncertainty is almost impossible. It's something that we can't prepare for. It's like we don't know the future unless you're a future teller. But we don't know, and we we don't know, and we can't plan for it. So it's and all you guys kind of touched on just and I like what Pastor Brian Wall said. When uncertain times come, you pivot and turn to God and move on. But all you guys touched on is just having someone to lean on, like relying on the Lord once again in uncertain times, because we can't tell the future. So but yeah, moving on, another commented question that we got was, and this is a really common question, which was why do bad things happen to bad people? If anyone wants to touch on that, why do bad things happen to bad and good people, to good people?
That's a serious question. That's like is that question coming through? Whoa, Pastor Brian, do you want to start? Let me put that one on you.
Let me pivot from you there, Ben.
I really, I'll just share. I think that requires like a lot of time to unpack that question, because that's like a serious question about the great controversy. There's so much about it where we could go. But I think we have to realize that as long as we live on this earth, rain pours on the good and the bad. Rain, and the same way pain comes on the good and the bad too, until Jesus comes. And so why? We know because of sin, but we know that sin is not the winning factor here. And so I think that's the only thing that I can say. Despite that happens, despite good person can go through bad thing, a bad person go through bad thing, that is not the end, and that's not the end result. And so that's my answer to that question. But I know I've been giving you guys a real quick Cole's notes of that, because that requires a lot of unpacking.
What I like about that question is because it speaks to all of our own sense and desire for justice and fairness. Like we want good things to happen to good people. We want, bad people to get what they deserve. And so it can actually set us up to pivot and think about God's grace, because none of us really get what we deserve. None of us come out really earning the blessings that we have received. And so I do appreciate that question, and I think it does kind of give us a hint, or if you're talking to somebody who's struggling with belief and doubt, you could say, like, what plants that in a brain? It doesn't evolve that way. And that fingerprint of that desire for justice and that assurance that one day God, who is perfectly merciful and perfectly just, will fix everything in a way that completely satisfies us and convicts us that his intervention and his decision is the most beautiful, gracious way that things could be resolved. But it does leave us unsatisfied in the here and now, but I think it's actually a good tension to wrestle with. So I appreciate the question, and it comes up in every generation. So it connects us with our humanity, that we wrestle with that.
Also, who determines who is good or bad? Last time I checked, I thought we were all essentially sinners, bad or whatever. And so, and who's to say that the things that we see as bad is actually bad? It's like for example, the whole thing about sun and rain, people usually associate sunshine with goodness and then rain with badness. But unless you know unless you have like your God is love glasses on, you don't know how to determine what is a blessing and what is a curse, or like what is good or bad. Because even things that look bad could actually be for your good. Because God said that everything I do is for your good. Whether you understand it at the moment or not, like you just need to trust God's provision. So that's a part of the answer that I've thought about in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And then that's going back to everything happens for a reason, right? And like Davina said, what is to determine what is bad or good, which is key. So thank you.
It is a theological question, really, that deals with the aspect of Calvinism and Arianism, Arminianism, not Arianism, Arminianism. Do we have free will, free choice, or is everything predetermined? And a lot of us approach our spiritual life from basically those two things, that everything's predetermined, you can't stop it, so deal with it, or we live with choice, and things happen because of cause and effect. And then it comes to the idea of God. Why does God allow all this to happen? Well, one school of thought is God gives us the choice. God gives us the ability to work through these things, and he does promise us in Scripture that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. 1974, I had to do a quick lookup on it. A book that was really good. It was called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was written by Rabbi Harold Kushner, and he lost his son of an incurable genetic disease at the age of 14. And he goes through the story of Job and the trial of Job. And it's a very good discussion on this kind of thing from a Jewish person who struggled with his own suffering in life. There was another book that I think was written by Rick Rice in the Adventist Church, and that is Why Do Bad Things Happen to God's People? Because that's an interesting thing. when we are a people of a promise, we are a people of hope, we are a people who share the love of God, and when bad things happen to us, I think that's also a very good question to ask. But I noticed one of the people says, well, that's a mean question to ask, but I think it's a good one.
I don't really know how to answer this except for, again, relating it to my own, I guess, suffering. And not saying I'm a good person, but I had struggled with suicidal ideations twice, and very serious suicidal ideations. And so I bring that up, and and they're both related to child loss. And it's like you're suffering almost alone, right? Like people can empathize, but they're not grieving a loss of a life that you carried and stuff. And I can only say that that kind of like suffering and pain, or like the unique suffering that we endure. I have two pictures in my mind. One is a little girl who is on Jesus' shoulder, and she's got her head like this, and Jesus is just comforting her. And the other picture is of a person who is like in a depression, in like a nest. They made a fort for themselves, and people are trying to get them out. And then the friend joins under that fort. And so I don't know why bad things happen to good people, but I do know who's in your fort with you. And I know that, for me, who's in that dark, cold, damp cave, and who walks that slow walk through that dark, damp cave. So I don't have the answer, but I do know who's with us in that.
Okay, end it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That's key. Even though you didn't necessarily answer the question, Ms. Mariano, and that's huge because you do know who's with you in your trials once again, which is awesome. So
I get reminded every hour.
But yeah, we're going to wrap it up for today. There is a part two. Which is awesome because we did get more questions on this topic of the youth role in the church. But thank you all for coming. I believe this has been a success, and I hope that everyone can benefit in any way that they had something to take away from this conversation. And I believe we did answer all the public questions. So I just wanted to thank the panelists. And then thank all of you attendees, and just being able to come. And then we're just going to end in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for all that you have done today for us and bringing us together once again. And thank you that you're able to just work through us and just continue to have us be a light for people and to spread your love and spread your word. Thank you for helping this be a success for our very first one, and that there'll be many more that you can work through. And I pray that you lead us in whatever direction you need us to go. In your name, amen. Awesome. Thank you, guys. I don't know everyone on.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. I just want to show you this, the photo I was talking about.